The millionaire, heir to a hotel empire, believed everything in the world had a price, until he lost it all in one night and was saved by a stranger's last few coins, a debt he could never repay with money. Rain pattered softly on the slick pavement, a steady drizzle that blurred the edges of the city night. Lucas Morris stumbled into the narrow alley, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. His once pristine suit, tailored from the finest wool, the kind that whispered power in boardrooms, now hung limp and mud-streaked, clinging to his skin like a second, unwanted layer. He pressed his back against the cold brick wall, sliding down until he sat on the wet ground, knees drawn up. The alley smelled of damp garbage and distant exhaust, a far cry from the polished lobbies he ruled. His hands trembled as he patted his pockets one last time, confirming the nightmare. Wallet gone. Phone vanished. Even the gold watch, a family heirloom that ticked away fortunes, stripped from his wrist in a blur of shadows and rough hands. The muggers had been quick, efficient, gone before he could even shout. Lucas stared at the empty space where his possessions had been, a hollow ache spreading in his chest. How had this happened? He, Lucas Morris, heir to the Morris Hotel empire, reduced to this? Anger surged first, hot and familiar, but it fizzled into something sharper. Helplessness. For the first time in his 38 years, control slipped through his fingers like the rain now dripping from his hair. Money had always been his shield, his weapon. It opened doors, silenced critics, shaped the world to his will. But here, in this forgotten corner of the city, it meant nothing. He was just a man, alone and exposed, the empire's weight pressing down without offering any protection. A shiver ran through him, not just from the chill seeping through his clothes, but from the realization gnawing at his core. What was he without it all? The deals, the penthouse views, the endless stream of people who bowed to his name? They felt distant, almost illusory now. Emptiness echoed inside him, louder than the distant hum of traffic. He'd built walls of wealth to keep vulnerability at bay, but tonight, those walls had crumbled. Pushing himself up on unsteady legs, Lucas wiped the rain from his face and forced himself to move. The nearest bus stop was a few blocks away. He remembered passing it earlier, dismissing it as something for other people. His shoes squelched on the pavement, each step a reminder of his fall. By the time he reached the shelter, his mind raced with plans. Call his assistant, summon a car, reclaim his night. But as he stood there, staring at the bus pulling up with its hiss of brakes and glow of interior lights, reality hit harder. No wallet, no cash, not even a card to swipe. He approached the driver, words tumbling out in a voice that sounded foreign to him, pleading almost. I've been robbed. I need to get home. Can you just... The driver shook his head, eyes weary under the brim of his cap. Sorry, pal. No fare, no ride. Rules are rules. Humiliation burned in Lucas's throat as he stepped back, the bus doors closing with a finality that echoed his defeat. He stood there in the rain, watching the taillights fade, wondering how a night that started with a high-stakes dinner could end with him stranded like this. For a man who'd never wanted for anything, this was the ultimate indignity. A glimpse into a world where power didn't buy mercy. The bus had barely pulled away when another one rumbled up to the stop, its headlights cutting through the misty rain like reluctant beacons. Lucas hesitated for a moment, then climbed aboard, his soaked clothes dripping onto the grooved floor. The interior smelled of vinyl seats and faint traces of coffee from someone's forgotten thermos. A few passengers dotted the rows, tired faces buried in phones or staring out at the blurred city lights. He made his way to the fare machine, his mind scrambling for words that might bend the rules just this once. The driver, A middle-aged man with a mustache that looked like it had seen too many late shifts glanced up from his route map. Lucas leaned in, keeping his voice low but steady, explaining the mugging, the empty pockets, the desperate need to get across town. He mentioned his name, Lucas Morris, as if it carried some invisible weight, but the driver's expression didn't flicker. "Can't do it, buddy," he said flatly, his eyes already shifting back to the road ahead. "No cash, no ride. Step off, please." Heat rose in Lucas's face, a mix of frustration and something sharper, like the sting of being invisible. He turned toward the doors, shoulders slumping, ready to face the rain again and whatever long walk awaited him. But before he could move, a soft rustle caught his ear. From a nearby seat, a woman stood up, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and a worn coat that spoke of practicality over style. She clutched a paperback in one hand, its cover creased from hours of reading. Her face showed the wear of a long day, lines around her eyes that suggested she carried more than just her own weight. But there was no pity in her gaze, just a quiet awareness, like she'd seen nights like this before. Without a word, she reached into her small purse, fishing out a handful of coins, the last ones by the look of it, scraping the bottom with a faint jingle. She stepped to the machine and dropped them in one by one, the metallic clinks echoing in the quiet bus like tiny declarations. The ticket spat out, and she held it toward him, her expression neutral, as if this were just another routine stop in her evening. Lucas took the slip of paper, his fingers brushing hers for a split second, warm against the chill that had settled into his bones. He opened his mouth to thank her, to say something that might bridge the gap, but the words stuck, tangled in surprise. Who was she? Why would a stranger do this, with no strings, no expectation of return? It wasn't the money that stunned him. A few coins were nothing in his world. It was the purity of the act, uncalculated, like a breath of fresh air in a room full of deals and favors. A debt formed in his mind, not financial but something deeper, an obligation to understand this kind of generosity that asked for nothing back. He felt exposed, as if she'd seen through his polished exterior to the man beneath, stripped bare by the night. She returned to her seat without a glance, flipping open her book again, the pages whispering as she settled in. The bus lurched forward, tires hissing on the wet asphalt, carrying them into the city's glow. Lucas sank into a seat a few rows back, his eyes drawn to her profile illuminated by the passing street lamps. She read steadily, undisturbed, her posture straight despite the fatigue etched in her features. He wondered about her life, what job left her riding buses this late. What stories filled that book she held so close? For the first time in years, curiosity stirred in him, not about power plays or profits, but about a person who existed outside his orbit. The bus stopped at intervals, doors sighing open and closed, passengers shuffling in and out. When her stop came, she stood smoothly, tucking the book under her arm and pulling her coat tighter. She passed him without acknowledgement, stepping down into the night. Lucas watched her go, her figure fading into the shadows of a dimly lit street, the rain swallowing her footsteps. The bus pulled away, leaving him with the ticket in his hand, a small, tangible reminder that kindness could appear without warning, reshaping a moment, maybe even a man. In the quiet hum of the ride, he felt the first crack in his carefully built armor, a whisper of change he couldn't yet name. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Lucas's penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors and sleek leather furniture. The place smelled faintly of espresso from the machine humming in the kitchen and the crisp scent of fresh linens delivered daily. After a restless night, tossing on Egyptian cotton sheets that suddenly felt too luxurious, too insulating, he'd showered off the grime of the alley, but the memory of those coins clinking into the fare box lingered like a stubborn echo. He stood by the window, coffee in hand, staring out at the city skyline that usually made him feel invincible. Today, it just looked like a distant puzzle, pieces he no longer cared to assemble. He couldn't shake her, the woman from the bus. In a life filled with calculated handshakes and boardroom negotiations, her simple act stood out raw and unscripted. It wasn't charity. It was something pure, like she'd seen him not as Lucas Morris, the heir apparent, but as just another person caught in a bad spot. For years, people approached him with agendas, eyes gleaming with what they could gain. But she'd given without looking back, without even a nod. It gnawed at him, this unfamiliar pull, stirring questions he'd long buried under layers of success and solitude. By mid-morning, he'd called his assistant Elena from the privacy of his home office, a room lined with mahogany shelves and glowing screens tracking stock tickers. He kept it casual, framing it as a minor loose end from the night before. Find out about a woman on the late bus route, dark hair, book in hand, paid my fare with change, discreetly, no traces. Elena, ever efficient, didn't question it. She was used to his requests, from scouting competitors to arranging last-minute flights. Within an hour, she texted back. Mia Bates, 36, works the evening shift at the Corner Spoon, a modest diner on the east side. Lives alone in a walk-up apartment. No social media footprint to speak of. Just a regular life pieced together from public records and a quick cross-check. Lucas paced the office, the carpet muffling his steps as he turned the information over in his mind. Mia Bates. The name felt ordinary, grounding, unlike the polished monikers in his world. He pictured her again, the way she'd tucked into her book, oblivious to the rain-streaked windows, her face calm amid the bus's sway. Approaching her as Lucas Morris would ruin it. He'd show up with the aura of wealth clinging to him like cologne, and whatever authenticity she'd shown would twist into suspicion, or worse, obligation. No, he couldn't taint that rare glimpse of genuine kindness with his empire's shadow. The Morris name opened doors, but it also locked people into roles. Flatterers, opportunists, or those who resented him from afar. An idea formed, quiet at first, then insistent. He'd create a facade, step out of his skin for once. Luke, he'd call himself. Just Luke. A guy down in his luck, maybe between jobs, navigating the city without the safety net of billions. It wasn't a game. It was a way to understand her, to see if that spark of humanity could exist without the distortion of status. He felt a flicker of excitement, mixed with unease. This was uncharted, a risk without spreadsheets or contingencies. But the emptiness from the night before pushed him forward. For the first time, he wanted to earn something, not buy it. That afternoon, he drove to the diner in a borrowed sedan from the garage. Nothing flashy, just reliable wheels that blended into traffic. The Corner Spoon sat on a bustling corner, its neon sign flickering faintly even in daylight, the windows steamed from the grill inside. He parked across the street, watching through the windshield as servers moved behind the counter, plates balancing in practiced hands. There she was, Mia, tying an apron around her waist, her movements efficient, a small smile for a regular as she refilled a coffee mug. The place smelled of frying bacon and fresh pie when he imagined stepping in, but he held back, content for now to observe from afar. In his mind, the plan solidified. He'd become a regular, ease into conversations without the weight of who he really was. It felt like shedding a heavy coat, exposing himself to the elements. What if she saw through it? What if this pulled him deeper than he intended? But the curiosity won out, a quiet resolve settling in. For a man who'd inherited everything, this was his first real pursuit, chasing not power, but the truth behind a stranger's kindness. As the sun dipped lower, casting the street in golden hues, Lucas, now Luke in his thoughts, started the car and drove away, already mapping his next visit. The bell above the door of the Corner Spoon tinkled softly as Lucas pushed it open, stepping into the warm hum of the diner for the first time. The air carried the comforting mix of sizzling bacon, fresh coffee brewing, and that faint, buttery hint of pie crust from the display case. It was a far cry from the sterile cafes he knew, with their minimalist menus and overpriced lattes. Here, the booths were vinyl, worn smooth from years of regulars, and the counter stools spun with a familiar creak. He tugged at his plain button-down shirt, nothing fancy, just something grabbed from the back of his closet to blend in, and chose a corner booth, away from the chatter of the lunch crowd. He came back the next day, and the day after, slipping into the routine like it was his own. As Luke, he ordered simple things, black coffee, a turkey sandwich, maybe a slice of apple pie if the day felt long. He sat quietly, nursing his mug, his eyes drifting to Mia as she moved through the space with a quiet efficiency that pulled at him. She wiped counters with quick, sure strokes, refilled salt shakers without missing a beat, and handled the rush with a calm that seemed effortless. A family at the next table laughed over pancakes, and she joined in just enough to make them feel welcome, her smile genuine but brief, like she saved her energy for what mattered. Lucas found himself watching her more than he intended, drawn to the way she treated everyone the same, the harried mom with kids in tow, the old man nursing his soup alone. No favoritism, no shortcuts. It hit him how different this was from his world, where interactions were laced with hidden motives, smiles calibrated for gain. In boardrooms, people catered to him, anticipating needs he didn't even voice. Here, he was just another face, and it felt strangely freeing, though awkward at first. He fumbled with the menu once, unsure how to ask for extras without sounding demanding, and ended up with too much cream in his coffee, stirring it slowly as he adjusted to the pace. Mia noticed him, of course. Hard not to spot the quiet guy who showed up like clockwork, always in that corner, his gaze thoughtful rather than intrusive. She poured his refills with the same professional nod she gave everyone, her apron pocket jingling with loose change from tips. But there was a spark of curiosity in her as she glanced his way during slower moments, wiping her hands on a towel. He looked out of place, not in a flashy way, but like someone carrying a weight that didn't match the diner's easy rhythm. His eyes held a depth, a quiet sadness that stood out amid the usual crowd of chatty locals and hurried workers. What was his story? A bad breakup? Job troubles? She shook off the thought, focusing on the orders stacking up, but it lingered, a small puzzle in her busy day. As the days blurred into a week, Lucas felt the pull deepen, sitting there, surrounded by the clatter of plates and the low murmur of conversations. He realized how hollow his own life had become. His empire ran on deals struck in glass towers, relationships built on leverage. But Mia's world was real, sweat on her brow during the dinner rush, a quick laugh with the cook over a spilled order. It made him question the fortress he'd built, the isolation wrapped in luxury. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, he caught her stealing a quick break, sipping water by the counter, her shoulders relaxing for a moment. He wondered what dreams kept her going through these long shifts, what lay beyond the apron and the polite efficiency. Mia, stacking clean glasses behind the counter, felt that same subtle shift. The guy, Luke, she'd overheard him say once, didn't push for talk, didn't complain like some. He just was. In a job where people came and went, his steady presence was oddly comforting, like a familiar landmark. But she kept her distance, professional as always, her mind drifting to her own quiet hopes, tucked away in her notebook at home. Little by little, though, she found herself glancing back, wondering if those deep eyes hid more than sadness. Maybe a story worth hearing. One day, the diner carried on around them, a small world of routines and unexpected connections, pulling them closer without a word. The late afternoon lull settled over the corner spoon like a soft blanket, the rush hour crowd thinning out to just a handful of stragglers, nursing cold coffee and picking at crumbs. The air hung heavy with the fading scents of grilled cheese and onion rings, the grill hissing quietly as it cooled. Mia wiped down the counter in slow, rhythmic circles, her mind already drifting toward the end of her shift, the ache in her feet a familiar companion after hours on the linoleum floor. She glanced at the clock, another half hour, and pulled a small notebook from her apron pocket, flipping it open on the counter's edge. It was her quiet ritual, these stolen moments when the diner breathed easy, letting her sketch out ideas that felt like little escapes. Lucas sat in his usual corner, his half-eaten sandwich forgotten as he watched her. The notebook caught his eye first, a worn thing, edges frayed from being tucked away too many times, pages bulging with notes and drawings. She leaned over it, pencil in hand, her brow furrowed in concentration as she added quick strokes, maybe a swirl here or a note there. It looked personal, intimate, like peeking into someone's unguarded thoughts. He hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but curiosity tugged at him stronger than before. This was the real her, he sensed, beyond the efficient server who kept the world at arm's length. He cleared his throat softly, just enough to draw her attention without startling her. Mia looked up, her pencil pausing midair, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she tucked it away, almost protectively. But something in his expression, open, not prying, made her pause. She slid the notebook closer, opening it a bit wider, her fingers tracing a page filled with delicate sketches of pastries, croissants flaked with butter, cupcakes topped with swirls of frosting, even a rustic loaf dusted with flour. Recipes scrawled in the margins, ingredients listed with careful measurements, tweaks noted in hurried script. It was her dream laid bare, a small bakery of her own, nothing grand, just a cozy spot where she could create things that brought people simple joy. Her eyes lit up as she described it, her voice softening with a passion she rarely let show, talking about the warmth of fresh-baked bread filling the air, the satisfaction of watching someone bite into something she'd made from scratch. Lucas leaned in slightly, drawn by the spark in her. He'd never seen that kind of fire in his own life, where days blurred into mergers and profit margins, responsibilities piled on like inheritance taxes. His world was mapped out from birth. Take over the hotels, expand the empire, live up to the name. But dreams? Real ones, born from nothing but heart? Those were foreign to him. Luxuries he hadn't afforded. Listening to her, a quiet envy stirred deep inside, not bitter, but eye-opening. Here was someone with so little by his standards, no safety net, no endless accounts, yet she chased this vision with a determination that made his billions feel empty. What would it be like, he wondered, to build something from scratch, not because it was expected, but because it called to you? Her words painted pictures in his mind, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon wafting from an oven, counters dusted with powdered sugar, a place where effort turned into something tangible, shared. Mia closed the notebook after a moment, a small smile lingering as she slipped it back into her pocket, the vulnerability fading as she straightened up. But the air between them felt different now, charged with that shared glimpse. The diner picked up again with a new customer jingling the bell, pulling her back to work. But Lucas stayed put, his coffee cooling untouched. That notebook had cracked open a door, showing him a side of life he'd overlooked. The raw power of a personal dream, how it could fuel someone through the grind. It made him question his own path, the one paved with gold but lacking soul. As the sun dipped lower outside, casting long shadows across the tables, he felt a pull toward her world, wondering if there was room in his for something as simple, as real, as that. The rain had picked up again by closing time, drumming steadily on the diner's roof like impatient fingers, turning the parking lot into a glossy mosaic of puddles under the streetlights. Inside the Corner Spoon, the last customers lingered, but one man at the counter, red-faced from too many refills and a bad day, decided to make his exit memorable. He grumbled about the soup being too salty, his voice rising as he jabbed a finger at the bill, accusing Mia of overcharging him on purpose. The diner fell quiet, eyes turning their way. But Mia stood her ground, her tone even and firm, explaining the charges without a hint of apology or defensiveness. She offered to adjust it if needed, her hands steady as she reprinted the receipt, diffusing the tension with a professionalism that left the man muttering but backing down. He tossed cash on the counter and stormed out, the bell clanging harshly behind him. Lucas, from his booth, watched it all, impressed by her poise. How she didn't shrink or snap back, just handled it like she'd faced worse and come out stronger. It reminded him of negotiations in his world, but without the power plays. Hers was a quiet strength, earned from real life, not boardroom tactics. As the lights dimmed and the cook called goodnight, Mia gathered her things, a jacket slung over her arm, that notebook tucked in her bag, and headed out into the downpour. The lot was empty now, save for her old sedan, a reliable beater with faded paint and a dented fender from years of city driving. She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, but the engine sputtered and whined, refusing to catch. Rain pelted the windshield, blurring the world outside, and she tried again, frustration creasing her forehead. Lucas, lingering by his car across the way, saw the headlights flicker weakly and felt an urge to step in, not as the mogul who could summon mechanics with a call, but as Luke, the guy who'd been showing up every day. He jogged over, rain soaking his shirt, and tapped on her window, offering help with a shrug that said he wasn't sure, but he'd try. Mia hesitated, then nodded, popping the hood as they both huddled under it, the engine's warm, oily smell mixing with the fresh rain. Lucas peered in, tools from her trunk in hand, a flashlight and a basic kit, but his fingers fumbled, slick and unpracticed. He'd never fixed a thing in his life. Cars were replaced, not repaired in his circles. He poked at wires awkwardly, earning a small, amused huff from her as he nearly dropped the wrench into a puddle. After a few tries, he spotted a loose battery cable, tightened it with a twist that felt comically triumphant, and the engine roared to life on the next attempt. They stood there, drenched and laughing softly at the absurdity, the rain easing up just enough to let the moment breathe. While the car idled, warming up, they leaned against it, the conversation starting simple, thanks exchanged, then drifting to the night. No scripts, no roles, just two people under the same wet sky. She mentioned her family back home, the quiet pressures of sending money when she could, the way expectations weighed without words. He shared a bit about his own. Distant parents, the invisible chains of always proving yourself, even when it felt hollow. It wasn't deep confessions, just honest glimpses, the kind that built bridges without fanfare. For Lucas, it felt like the first real talk in years, unfiltered by status, stirring a warmth he hadn't expected. Mia sensed it too, that fragile thread connecting them, her guard softening and the steam rising from the hood. As she finally drove off, waving through the window, the night felt a little less lonely, the crack in their walls letting in a hint of possibility. The small apartment Lucas had rented under his alias felt like a shoebox compared to his penthouse. Plain walls painted a neutral beige, a second-hand couch that sagged in the middle, and a kitchenette where the fridge hummed a little too loudly at night. It smelled of takeout containers and the faint mustiness of old carpet. a far cry from the polished sterility of his real home. He'd chosen it for authenticity, a place where Luke could blend in. But tonight, after that rain-soaked chat with Mia, it felt almost cozy, like a hideaway from the chaos. He kicked off his shoes, still damp from the parking lot, and sank into the couch, replaying her words in his mind. The easy way she'd opened up about family pulls, how it mirrored his own burdens, but without the gloss of wealth. For once, a conversation had left him feeling lighter, not strategized. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, shattering the quiet like an unwelcome intruder. The screen lit up with Father, a contact he'd programmed years ago, without any warmth. Lucas stared at it for a ring or two, a knot forming in his gut, before picking up. The voice on the other end was as crisp and commanding as ever. Mr. Morris Sr., the man who'd built an empire from nothing and expected his son to guard it like a fortress. No hello, just straight into business. Details of a looming merger, numbers ticking like a bomb, stock values, projected profits, the pressure to seal a deal before competitors sniffed it out. His father's tone was ice cold, laced with that familiar edge of disappointment, as if Lucas's recent distractions were already costing them. It was all figures and timelines, no room for questions, just the weight of legacy pressing down. Lucas leaned back, eyes on the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead, feeling the contrast hit him like a cold draft. Just hours ago, talking with Mia under the rain, there'd been no agendas, no bottom lines, just shared truths that warmed from the inside. Now, this call dragged him back to a world of golden cages, where relationships were transactions and vulnerability a weakness to exploit. His chest tightened a suffocating squeeze as his father's words droned on about responsibilities, about not letting the family name slip. It felt like chains tightening, the kind forged from boardroom battles and endless expectations. For the first time, Lucas wondered if this was all there was, chasing numbers that never satisfied, living in a life scripted by someone else. The call ended abruptly, his father signing off with a curt reminder to get his head in the game, leaving silence that echoed too loudly in the tiny space. Lucas set the phone down, rubbing his temples, the hum of the fridge now sounding like mockery. That gilded world, penthouse views, private jets, deals that moved millions, suddenly seemed like a trap, shiny but empty, keeping him from anything real. Mia's laughter in the rain replayed in his head, simple and unforced, making him question everything. Could he step away from it all? Build a life that wasn't measured in assets but in moments that mattered. The thought scared him, but it also sparked a quiet hope, like a door cracking open to something unknown. Outside, the city lights flickered through the thin curtains, a reminder that two worlds were colliding, and he was caught right in the middle. In the makeshift office he'd set up in the corner of his rented apartment, a folding table cluttered with a laptop, scattered papers, and a mug of cooling coffee, Lucas sat back in the creaky chair, the glow from the screen casting shadows on his face. The space smelled of instant noodles from last night's dinner and the faint tang of printer ink, a stark reminder of how far he'd strayed from his usual polished setup. Days had blurred since that rainy night fix-up in the parking lot, and his feelings for Mia had grown like vines creeping through cracks, quiet but insistent. Her dream of that little bakery, sketched out in her notebook with such raw hope, played on repeat in his mind. He saw her behind the counter at the diner, wiping sweat from her brow during rushes, and it tugged at him. How she deserved more than scraping by, how he could make it happen. He leaned forward, fingers flying over the keys, pulling strings from his real world without leaving a trace. A quick call to his trusted lawyer kept off the books, and it was done. An anonymous grant fund for small businesses funneled through a shell foundation that sounded noble on paper. No fanfare, just a quiet setup where applications poured in, and Mia's, crafted from her notebook ideas, though she didn't know he'd glimpsed them, would rise to the top, fairly. He'd make sure of it, tweaking the criteria just enough. Passion over polish, heart over hype. It felt right, like giving her the boost she earned, without the mess of revealing who he really was. A few emails later, the wheels turned, invisible but powerful, his wealth working like it always had, solving problems from afar. A selfish thrill bubbled up as he hit send on the final approval, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. This was what he did best. Cut through the red tape, turn dreams into reality with a check. Mia would wake up to good news, her bakery one step closer, and he'd watch from the shadows, knowing he'd played a part. It warmed him, that secret joy, like holding a winning hand in a game only he knew about. Money had always been his fix, buying loyalty, easing guilt, shaping outcomes. Why not use it for something good this time? He pictured her face lighting up, those tired eyes sparking with possibility, and it felt like a gift, pure and simple. He hadn't paused to think if it robbed her of the struggle, the pride of earning it on her own terms. In his world, help came wrapped in dollars, and that was just how things worked. As the evening light faded through the thin blinds, casting stripes across the room, Lucas closed his laptop, a quiet contentment settling in. The fund's announcement would hit soon, applications opening wide, and Mia's path cleared without her ever suspecting. It was his way of saying thank you for that bus fare, for cracking open his guarded heart. But deep down a whisper of doubt flickered. He pushed it aside, focusing on the win. Outside, the city hummed on, unaware of the invisible hand weaving fates, while in the diner across town, Mia wiped down tables, her notebook dreams tucked safely away, waiting for a chance she thought she'd have to fight for alone. In Mia's cozy apartment, the kind with mismatched furniture collected over years and a kitchen table that doubled as a workspace, the evening light filtered through sheer curtains, casting a warm glow on the scattered mail she'd just brought in. The place smelled of fresh laundry from the dryer down the hall and the faint vanilla from a candle she lit to unwind after shifts. Her heart raced as she tore open the envelope from the small business fund, plain white, no frills, but the words inside hit like a burst of sunshine. Approved. A grant, enough to kickstart her bakery dream, covering startup costs without strings that felt too tight. She sank onto the couch, clutching the letter, a laugh bubbling up from deep inside, the kind that mixed relief and disbelief. After all the late nights, sketching recipes, pinching pennies, doubting if it'd ever happen, here it was, a real chance, earned through her application that poured out her passion on every page. She grabbed her phone, fingers flying to call her mom, the one person who'd always believed in her crazy ideas. The line connected, and Mia's voice spilled over with excitement, words tumbling about the grant, the bakery name she'd finally settled on, how she'd bake those cinnamon rolls just like Grandma's. Her mom's warm congratulations echoed back, laced with pride that made Mia's eyes sting a little. It felt like a turning point, like all the hard days at the diner were finally paying off, building towards something of her own. She paced the small living room, already picturing the storefront, the oven humming, customers smiling over fresh pastries. Hope wrapped around her like a soft blanket, making the future seem bright and possible. Just then, her phone buzzed with a text from an old friend. Nothing unusual, just a link with a quick note. Saw this, and thought of that quiet guy at your diner. Weird coincidence? Mia clicked it absently, still riding the high, the screen loading an online article from a business news site. The headline popped up. Mystery heir of Morris Empire steps into spotlight. Lucas Morris revealed at charity gala. She scrolled down, skimming the words about the hotel tycoon, his low-profile life, the billions at stake. Then the photo loaded. A sharp image of a man in a tux, smiling confidently under chandeliers, surrounded by the elite. Her breath caught, the room tilting as recognition slammed in. Those eyes, that jawline, it was Luke. Her Luke, the regular with the sad smile and helpful hands. But here he was, Lucas Morris, heir to a fortune, not some down-on-his-luck guy scraping by. Everything froze. The grant letter slipped from her hand, fluttering to the floor. Coincidences unraveled in her mind, the way he'd shown up right after that bus night, his awkward charm in the diner, the perfect timing of this funding that seemed too good, too targeted. Was it all a setup? A rich man's game pulling strings behind the scenes? The joy curdled into a sick twist in her stomach, betrayal sharp as a knife. Her dreams, her hard work, tainted now, like charity from on high, not something she'd won fair and square. She stared at the screen, the photo mocking her, the warmth in the room turning cold as the truth sank in, shattering the fragile trust she'd started to build. The evening air outside the corner spoon carried a chill that matched the frost in Mia's eyes as she waited in the dim parking lot, the neon sign flickering overhead like a faulty heartbeat. The diner had just closed, the last lights inside switching off one by one, leaving the lot bathed in the glow of a single street lamp. She'd texted him, Luke, or whatever his name really was, to meet her here, her fingers shaking with a mix of rage and hurt as she hit send. Now, as his car pulled up, unassuming as always, she clutched the printed article in her hand, the paper crumpling under her grip. Lucas stepped out, his face lighting up at first sight of her, that familiar quiet smile starting to form. But it died when he saw her expression, cold, unyielding, like a door slammed shut. She thrust the article at him without a word, the photo of Lucas Morris staring back from the page, tuxedo-clad and worlds away from the man who'd fumbled with her car engine in the rain. He took it, confusion knitting his brows as he scanned the headline, the pieces falling into place too late. His stomach dropped, the secret he'd guarded so carefully, unraveling in an instant. He opened his mouth to explain, words spilling out in a rush, about the mugging, the bus, how he'd wanted to know her without the baggage of his name, how the grant was just to help, nothing more, but each syllable landed like a misfired arrow, glancing off her armor. Mia stood there, arms crossed, the betrayal burning in her chest like acid, eroding the trust they'd built over coffee refills and late-night talks. Her voice cut through his excuses, sharp but steady, accusing him of turning her life into a joke, a rich man's whim, playing pretend while she poured her real sweat into every shift. Was the bakery grant his idea of charity? A way to buy her gratitude? Like she was some project to fix? The words hit Lucas like a wave, knocking the air from his lungs. He tried again, insisting it was genuine, that he'd seen her passion and wanted to make it real. But she shook her head, her eyes flashing with a pain that mirrored his growing dread. She pulled out the grant letter from her bag, the one that had brought her such joy just hours ago, and shoved it into his hands alongside the article. It wasn't a gift. It was an insult, stripping away the one thing she held dear, the belief that she could rise on her own merit, without some invisible hand pulling strings from a penthouse tower. The lot seemed to shrink around them, the distant hum of traffic fading as the weight of her words sank in. Lucas felt his world crack, the ego he'd worn like a suit of armor splintering under the force of her gaze. He'd thought he was helping, using his power for good, but now he saw it clearly. He'd robbed her of her pride, turned her dream into something handed down, not earned. The man who'd commanded boardrooms, who never doubted his moves, stood there exposed, the hollowness of his life staring back at him through her disappointment. Mia turned away, her steps deliberate as she walked toward her car, leaving him with the papers fluttering in the breeze. No dramatic exit, just a quiet finality that echoed louder than any shout. As her taillights faded into the night, Lucas remained rooted, the shards of his self-assurance scattering at his feet, realizing for the first time that some things couldn't be fixed with money or words, only with the hard truth of what he'd truly lost. Mia's words were a mirror reflecting the man Lucas never dared to face. Now the mirror is shattered, and so is his ego. But forgiveness cannot be bought. It must be earned. That journey has a name. If you believe Lucas must begin a true journey of atonement, one of sacrifice and action, comment with the keyword atonement. We'll see if he has the courage to pay the price. Back in the penthouse that night, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, depositing Lucas into a space that once felt like a throne room, but now closed in like bars of gold-plated steel. The air was cool and sterile, scented with the faint citrus polish the cleaning service used every day, the kind that masked any hint of real life. Floor to ceiling windows framed the glittering city below, a view he'd always seen as proof of his conquest, but tonight it mocked him. Distant lights twinkling like stars he could never touch. He shrugged off his jacket, letting it fall to the marble floor, and wandered through the expansive rooms, the echo of his footsteps the only company in the vast emptiness. The leather couch in the living room swallowed him as he sank down, the cushions too perfect, too unyielding. Around him, the trappings of wealth loomed, abstract art on the walls, bought for investment, not love. A bar stocked with rare scotches he'd barely sipped, gadgets that hummed quietly, anticipating needs he didn't have. It all felt hollow now, a gilded cage he built himself, locking out anything messy or true. Mia's words replayed in his head like a loop he couldn't stop, her voice steady but laced with hurt, calling out his lies, his arrogance in thinking money could fix what he'd broken. He rubbed his eyes, the sting of unshed tears surprising him as the truth clawed deeper. He'd fallen for her. Really fallen in those quiet diner moments, but he'd poisoned it with the one tool he'd always relied on, his fortune. How had he not seen it? All his life, trust came with price tags, relationships sealed in deals, love, if he'd ever known it, measured in what it could buy. But Mia wasn't for sale. She'd shown him kindness without expecting a return, and he'd repaid it by turning her dream into another transaction. The grant, his help, wasn't generous. It was control, a way to keep her close without risking himself. Despair washed over him, heavy and unrelenting, making the penthouse feel even smaller, the walls pressing in with their silent judgment. He paced to the window, forehead against the cold glass, staring at the anonymous streets below, where people like her lived real lives, scraped by, but felt things deeply without filters. For the first time, the empire he'd inherited felt like a burden, not a birthright. Chains disguised as crowns. What good was all this if it left him alone, staring at his reflection in the glass, a man who'd lost the one person who'd seen him as more than his name? The night stretched on, the city buzzing indifferently outside, while inside, Lucas grappled with the wreckage, wondering if there was any way out of this prison he'd called home. The next morning dragged Lucas to his father's office like an invisible leash, the summons coming via a terse email that brooked no delay. The executive suite at the top of the Morris Tower gleamed with intimidation. Polished mahogany desk, wide as a conference table, walls lined with framed deals and awards that screamed dominance, the air thick with the scent of aged leather and expensive cigars. Mr. Morris Sr. sat behind that desk like a king on his throne, his silver hair impeccably combed, his suit sharp enough to cut glass, eyes piercing under bushy brows that had stared down countless rivals. He'd heard about the mess. Word traveled fast in their circles, a whisper from an assistant or a flagged transaction. And now he leaned back, steepling his fingers, ready to dispense his version of wisdom. Lucas stood there, feeling smaller than he had in years, the weight of the night before still clinging to him like a bad hangover. His father didn't offer a seat or a coffee. Instead, he launched in with that gravelly voice, mocking the whole affair, as if it were a minor glitch in a quarterly report. A waitress, of all things, throwing his son off balance? Forget her. Get back to the real work. The mergers, the expansions, the empire that didn't run on feelings. It was just a slip-up, the old man said, waving it off like swatting a fly, his tone dripping with disdain for anything that smelled of weakness or distraction. But as the words landed, something shifted in Lucas, a spark igniting in the pit of his stomach. This man, his father, embodied everything he'd been running from without realizing it. The cold calculations, the dismissal of heart for profit, the life where people were pieces to move, not connect with. Hearing it now, laid bare in that sterile office, it hit like a mirror shattering, showing Lucas the reflection of his old self. This was the crossroads. Slip back into the familiar cage, safe but soulless, or break free. Chase the change Mia had sparked in him, even if it meant losing it all. The air felt heavier as he left, his father's laughter echoing behind, but for the first time, Lucas walked out with a quiet resolve budding inside, the tyrant's advice pushing him toward rebellion rather than retreat. The bell over the door of the corner spoon jingled with its usual cheer as Lucas pushed inside. But this time, his steps felt heavier, like carrying the weight of a decision that could upend everything. The diner smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling grease, the lunch crowd thinning out to a few regulars hunched over their plates. He wasn't here for his usual booth or a quiet chat. Instead, he scanned the room for the owner, a burly man named Frank, who'd run the place for decades, his apron stained from years of spills and stories. Lucas approached the counter, his hands shoved in his pockets to hide the tremble, and asked straight out for a job. Anything, even washing dishes in the back. Frank raised an eyebrow, chuckling at first like it was a joke, eyeing this guy in plain clothes, who looked more like he belonged in an office than elbow-deep in suds. But something in Lucas's eyes, raw, earnest, made him shrug and nod. "All right, kid. Start now. Sink's piling up." Lucas tied on a faded apron that hung loose around him, the fabric rough against his skin, and headed to the back kitchen where the steam rose thick from the dishwasher, and the clatter of pots echoed off the tiled walls. His hands plunged into the hot, soapy water, fingers pruning almost immediately as he scrubbed crusted plates and silverware that slipped through his grip. He'd never done this before, never had to, with staff handling every mess in his life. But each swipe of the sponge felt like a small act of penance, a way to strip away the layers of privilege that had blinded him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, mixing with the humidity, and his back ached after just an hour, but he kept at it, determination fueling him through the awkward fumbles. This wasn't about playing a role anymore. It was about proving to himself, and maybe to her, that he could change one dirty dish at a time. Mia caught sight of him through the pass-through window, her tray freezing mid-lift as shock rippled across her face. There he was, the millionaire heir, sleeves rolled up, hands buried in grimy water, looking out of place and utterly serious. Anger flared first, Was this another stunt, some twisted game to worm his way back? But as she watched him struggle with a stubborn pan, dropping it with a clang that drew a gruff laugh from the cook, confusion crept in. No one faked misery like that, not for long. Still, trust was shattered, and she turned away, busying herself with wiping tables and refilling ketchups, her movements sharp and deliberate. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction, not yet. Deep down, though, a tiny voice wondered if this was real, if the man who'd hidden behind money was finally facing the grind she'd known all her life. The diner carried on around them, orders calling out, steam hissing, but the air hummed with unspoken tension, Lucas's quiet resolve clashing against Mia's guarded silence like waves against a stubborn shore. The days blurred into a steady rhythm at the corner spoon, each one chipping away at the old Lucas like sandpaper on fine wood. Morning started early now, with him hauling trash bags out to the dumpster behind the diner, the alley air thick with yesterday's grease and the sharp bite of garbage. He'd traded his luxury sedan for the bus again, coins jingling in his pocket from the slim paychecks Frank handed over every Friday. Enough for basics, but nothing more. The penthouse sat empty across town, its keys tucked away in a drawer. Instead, he crashed in a cramped studio apartment nearby, the kind with a Murphy bed that creaked when he pulled it down and a shower that ran hot for only 5 minutes. No more valet parking or drivers on call. He walked the blocks in worn sneakers, feeling every pebble underfoot, the city streets teaching him humility one step at a time. He sold off the extras quietly, without fanfare, the flashy watch that once signaled status, now swapped at a pawn shop for cash that barely covered rent. The designer suits donated to a thrift store, their empty hangers rattling in his old closet like ghosts. His phone, once buzzing with deal alerts and invitations, went silent as he ignored calls from the office, letting voicemails pile up like unread letters. Meals were simple now. Leftover dinner soup heated on a hot plate, or a sandwich slapped together from whatever was in the mini-fridge. The ache in his muscles from scrubbing pots lingered into the evenings, but so did a strange sense of purpose, like shedding skin that had grown too tight. No more hiding behind wealth. This was raw, real work, the kind that left blisters and built character he hadn't known he lacked. Mia watched from afar, her shifts overlapping his in tense silence. She'd catch glimpses of him through the kitchen door, back bent over the sink, face set in quiet focus as suds splashed up his arms. At first it fueled her anger, seeing him there like some fallen prince playing at poverty. But as weeks ticked by, she noticed the changes. The proud shoulders slumping with real fatigue, the once polished hands now rough and calloused. The way he didn't complain when Frank barked orders or when a stack of plates nearly toppled. He kept his distance. No attempts to chat or explain, just head down, doing the grunt work day after day. It stirred something in her, a mix of doubt and unwilling curiosity. Was this an act, or had the betrayal cracked him open, forcing a real shift? She busied herself with customers, her movements efficient as always, but her glances lingered longer, tracing the lines of exhaustion on his face. Through it all, Lucas felt the layers peeling away, each stripped possession and sore muscle revealing a man he'd buried under billions. The arrogance that once armored him dissolved in the steam of the kitchen, replaced by a humility that tasted bitter, but true. He thought of Mia constantly, her words from that shattering night echoing as motivation. Not to win her back, not yet, but to become someone worthy of the kindness she'd shown a stranger on a bus. The dinner hummed around him, plates clattering, coffee percolating, a small world where actions spoke louder than apologies, and for the first time, he was listening. The boardroom at Morris Corporation headquarters loomed like a fortress of glass and steel, the long oak table polished to a mirror shine under the harsh fluorescent lights that cast no warmth. The air smelled of fresh coffee from the sideboard and the subtle tang of aftershave from the suited executives gathered around, their faces a mix of curiosity and impatience. Lucas had called this meeting himself, emailing the board late the night before, his fingers steady on the keys despite the storm inside. His father sat at the head, arms crossed, a smug glint in his eye, convinced his wayward son had finally come to his senses after weeks of radio silence and rumors of odd behavior. The old man leaned back in his leather chair, expecting a return to the fold, a recommitment to the empire he'd clawed from nothing. Lucas stood at the other end, dressed simply in a button-down shirt and slacks, no tie, no cufflinks, just the faint scent of diner soap clinging to his skin from that morning's shift. He cleared his throat, the room falling silent as he pulled a folded paper from his pocket, unfolding it with deliberate care. His voice came out calm, measured as he read the resignation letter aloud, renouncing every title, every share, every claim to the inheritance that had defined him. Gasps rippled through the room, chairs creaking as board members shifted, exchanging stunned glances. His father's face hardened, the smugness cracking into fury, his knuckles whitening on the armrests. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a clean break, Lucas explaining in quiet words how he'd spent his life stewarding someone else's legacy, but now he craved something built with his own hands, no matter how small or uncertain. The weight of it all hung in the air as he finished, the paper rustling softly when he set it down. No dramatics, just a steady gaze around the table, meeting eyes that ranged from shock to calculation. His father erupted then, voice booming with accusations of foolishness and betrayal, but Lucas didn't flinch. He'd expected this, the final lash of the whip he'd grown up under. He turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed down the sterile hallway. Outside, the city buzzed on, indifferent to the empire he'd just walked away from, but inside Lucas, a quiet freedom bloomed, raw and real, like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. The sacrifice stung, stripping away the safety net of billions. But it felt right, a step toward becoming the man Mia's kindness had glimpsed that rainy night on the bus. The alley behind the corner spoon smelled of cooling grease and damp concrete, the kind that lingered after a day of kitchen hustle, with the faint hum of the dumpster fan cutting through the evening quiet. Mia had heard the news buzzing through the city gossip channels. Lucas Morris, the heir who'd vanished from the spotlight, had walked away from it all, leaving a trail of shocked headlines and a furious father in his wake. She couldn't wrap her head around it, pacing her apartment all afternoon, the questions piling up like unwashed dishes. Why throw away billions? What game was he playing now? By closing time, she couldn't hold it in anymore, spotting him, slipping out the back door after his shift, his shoulders slumped under the weight of another long day, apron untied and dangling from his hand like a surrendered flag. She stepped into the alley shadows, her voice breaking the stillness as she called out, stopping him in his tracks. He turned, surprise flickering across his face in the dim light from the single bulb overhead, his eyes carrying that same exhaustion she'd seen building over weeks of silent toil. Mia's heart twisted despite herself. Seeing him like this, stripped down to a man who'd traded boardrooms for bus fares, made her walls crack just a bit. She demanded to know why, her words hanging in the air like steam from the vents. Why he'd gutted his life, given up the empire that defined him. Lucas paused, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw, the alley's chill seeping into the moment as he searched for the right words. He didn't spin a tale or dodge. Instead, he met her gaze steadily, his voice low and honest, saying it was all to become the kind of person deserving of that simple act of kindness she'd shown a stranger on a rainy bus night. No grand gestures, no pleas for forgiveness, just the truth, raw and unadorned, echoing back to that first spark between them. It hit her like a quiet wave, thawing the ice she'd built around her hurt, making her see the change not as a show, but as something real, forged in the grind he'd chosen. The alley seemed to hold its breath, the distant city sounds fading as that admission lingered, softening the edges of her anger into something tentative, like the first hint of spring after a hard winter. A few weeks slipped by like quiet footsteps, the kind that heal old wounds without fanfare, and Lucas found himself at a small corner cafe down the street from the diner, the air thick with the aroma of fresh ground beans and buttery croissants cooling on racks. The place was cozy, with mismatched wooden tables scarred from years of conversations, and sunlight slanting through the windows in lazy beams that danced on the checkered floor. He'd texted Mia earlier, keeping it simple. No pressure, just a request to meet, his fingers hesitating over the send button as doubt flickered. She showed up, her steps measured, curiosity edging out the caution in her eyes, her hair tied back in that practical way, a light jacket slung over her arm against the autumn chill creeping in. They sat across from each other, steam rising from their mugs like unspoken thoughts, the cafe's low hum of chatter providing a buffer. Lucas wasn't the polished heir anymore, nor the fumbling dishwasher. He was just a man now, lines of fatigue etched deeper from real work, his hands bearing the faint scars of kitchen burns and calluses from scrubbing. He slid a folder across the table, plain and unassuming, filled with pages he'd pieced together in stolen hours, charts, projections, supplier lists, all drawn from the business smarts he'd honed over years, but now stripped of ego. It was a plan for her bakery, detailed down to the layout of counters and the sourcing of flour, funded by the last of his personal savings, the remnants he'd held on to after walking away from the empire. He didn't hand over cash or make promises from on high. Instead, he laid it out as an offer between equals, a partnership 50-50, where her creativity met his know-how, her recipes the heart, his strategies the backbone. No strings, no control grabs, just two people building something together, respecting what each brought to the table. Mia flipped through the pages slowly, her fingers tracing the numbers and sketches, surprise softening her features as she saw how he'd woven in her ideas from that old notebook, turning dreams into something tangible without overshadowing her. It felt different this time, not a handout, but a hand extended, grounded in the humility he'd earned through sweat and silence. The cafe faded around them, the clink of cups and murmur of voices distant as the weight of his proposal settled. For Lucas, it was a bridge built from the ruins of his mistakes, a way to show he'd changed, not with words, but with actions that honored her strength. Mia felt the shift too, that guarded part of her thawing as she looked up, seeing not the arrogant millionaire who'd once played games, but a partner who valued her as an equal, ready to share the load and the wins. The moment hung there, warm and tentative, like the first sip of coffee on a cool morning, promising a future shaped by mutual respect rather than power plays. The renovation site for the bakery buzzed with quiet energy, the air thick with the scent of fresh sawdust and drying paint, tools scattered across drop cloths that crinkled underfoot. Bare bulbs dangled from exposed beams, casting warm pools of light on the half-finished counters and the outline of where ovens would soon hum to life. Lucas and Mia moved through the space side by side, measuring spots for shelves, their hands brushing occasionally in that easy rhythm of shared purpose. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun filtering through plastic-sheeted windows, a far cry from the polished towers Lucas once called home, but it felt right, raw, and full of potential. The door creaked open without warning, and in walked Mr. Morris Sr., his presence like a storm cloud rolling in, suit impeccable, face etched with that familiar mix of authority and disdain. He scanned the room with a curled lip, as if the humble setup offended him, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the concrete floor. He'd come for one last pull, wallet ready, offering numbers that could buy back the empire, stocks, positions, the life Lucas had walked from. It was his final play, money as the ultimate persuader, his voice low and insistent, painting pictures of power lost and futures wasted in this shack. But Mia stood firm beside Lucas, her posture straight, chin lifted in quiet defiance, no longer the outsider looking in, but a partner in every sense. Together they faced him, the air thickening with unspoken history, the years of cold expectations, the legacy that had chained Lucas for so long. Lucas met his father's gaze steadily, his words simple and final, declaring that world no longer his, that real happiness lay here, in this dusty space built on sweat and shared dreams, not inherited gold. The old man's bluster faltered, his offers hanging unanswered as realization dawned. His son was gone, not in body, but in spirit, slipped from the grasp of control he'd wielded like a weapon. Defeat shadowed his features, the tyrant's armor cracking as he turned away. Stepped slower now, leaving behind the echo of a door closing on an era. The renovation site breathed easier in his absence. The old worldview vanquished like a ghost finally laid to rest, leaving Lucas and Mia in the warm glow of what they'd chosen together. The bakery stood on the cusp of completion, its air alive with the faint scent of fresh paint, mingling with the promise of baked goods yet to come. Bare counters gleaming under soft overhead lights, shelves waiting for jars of flour and sugar. The oven installed but silent, like a heart ready to beat. Tools lay scattered from the day's work, drop cloths folded in corners, and the space felt intimate, a cocoon of new beginnings after the storm of Mr. Morris's departure. Lucas and Mia were alone now, the echo of the closing door fading into quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows through the front windows, warming the room like a gentle embrace. Lucas wiped his hands on a rag, dust clinging to his shirt from sanding edges earlier. His posture relaxed, but his eyes carrying the weight of all he'd laid bare. He didn't launch into flowery speeches or grand declarations. Instead, he turned to her with a simple honesty, his voice steady as he admitted how much he'd grown in her presence, becoming someone he could finally respect. Not the air chasing shadows, but a man shaped by real choices and quiet regrets. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was acknowledging it, the lies and the hurt, and choosing to build forward anyway. Mia stood by the window, her fingers tracing the sill, where soon pastries would cool, her heart softening like dough under warm hands. She'd seen his journey up close, the blisters from dishwashing, the humility in his eyes after walking away from billions, the way he'd shown up day after day without demanding credit, the betrayal that once burned now simmered to embers, replaced by a recognition of his change, earned through fire and time. A soft smile curved her lips, genuine and unhurried, as she met his gaze, her own words echoing his sentiment, affirming that she'd come to feel the same pull toward the person he'd become. The moment wrapped around them like a shared breath, no rush or drama, just two people stepping across the divide, forgiveness flowing naturally as the sun dipped lower. It felt solid, mature, a bond forged not in fairy tales but in the grit of real life, ready for whatever came next, in this space they'd claim together. A year had rolled by like a gentle wave, smoothing the rough edges of the past, and the Last Coin Bakery stood as a beacon on the bustling street corner, its sign swinging softly in the breeze. The air inside danced with a warm embrace of fresh-baked bread and cinnamon swirls. The oven's hum mingling with the cheerful chatter of customers lined up at the counter, their faces lighting up over flaky croissants and steaming coffees. It was a hit, this little spot. Nothing flashy, just honest goodness that drew folks back day after day. The kind of place where stories unfolded over shared treats. Mia moved through it all with a quiet confidence, her apron dusted with flour as she guided a new staffer on piping perfect frosting roses, her hands steady and sure, eyes sparkling with the pride of something built from her own dreams. No more scraping by. She was the heart of this place, her recipes turning strangers into regulars, her warmth making it feel like home. Lucas sat in the back nook, poring over the books with a focused ease, numbers adding up not to empires, but to a life they both cherished. He looked up, catching her eye, a soft smile breaking through the concentration. The man who'd once commanded towers, now content with the simple math of success earned together. He rose, sneaking a dab of cream from a nearby bowl, and dotted it on her nose with a playful grin, drawing a laugh from her that filled the room like sunlight. They shared a quick embrace amid the bustle, teasing words lost in the joy of it. Two equals in every way, respect woven into their glances, equality in their shared load, a love tested by fire and emerging stronger, like dough risen just right. Sometimes, to uncover your true worth, you must let go of all you thought you owned. And sometimes, a small kindness, like those last coins, for a stranger, can purchase an entire lifetime. Thank you for being here. This story was created with a belief in the power of human connection. If you believe in that too, please help us build our community by subscribing and leave a comment telling us your favorite part of the story. Your engagement is a priceless encouragement to us.